Now this is being enhanced by two things. One is by upgraded intelligence from the United States so that the Ukrainians can strike more precisely and more further into Russia. And indeed, we're seeing even more targeted strikes on these petrochemical refineries where they're actually striking, according to experts, the heart of them, the parts that are really hard to rebuild. But if you add on top of that the reported provision of the Tomahawk missile from the United States, lots of range there, lots of power, it doesn't put Russia in a very good spot. And let's not forget that it is the energy, the oil infrastructure that is providing cash, a lot of cash, billions of dollars for the Russian war machine.
Hello and welcome to the Trump Report. My name's Louis Sykes. Today we are joined by Michael Bociurkiw, a senior fellow at the Atlantic Council. He's also an author and journalist and founder of the Substack World Briefing. Michael, thank you very much for joining me today.
Good to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Always great to get your insights, Michael. Well, Trump says that Hamas and Israel have agreed to the first phase of a peace deal. Has he finally earned his Nobel Prize, do we think?
Well, my friend, this is a historic moment in more ways than one. One being, of course, it is an extraordinary geopolitical moment. But secondly, for the first time, you may hear me actually compliment Donald Trump after being critical of him for such a long time. But, you know, we gotta hand it to him. I mean, he is the one single U.S. leader, in fact, foreign leader, who has managed to come down very hard on Benjamin Netanyahu, get him to sit down and look seriously at bringing this horrible, horrible war to an end. And I think a switching point here was a pivot point, if you will, was Israel's pretty much unilateral strike on Qatar, where they did hit the place where it was said that Hamas negotiators were meeting. This was a horrible thing to do, of course, not only because it disrupted negotiations, but because you're striking at one of the most important U.S. allies in the Gulf region. It was done without the knowledge of the White House. So that was not a good calculation on behalf of Netanyahu. And I think, again, that pivoted everything to put more control in Mr. Trump's hands and bring down the bricks on Netanyahu. But yeah, this could go down as the biggest accomplishment of Mr. Trump's second term. Of course, first term was the Abraham Accords, when we're talking about the Middle East, which didn't go all the way as it was envisioned. And yeah, it could be his path to the Nobel Peace Prize, although the problem here is we're running out of days because it's supposed to be announced any time now. But certainly one likes to believe that, you know, as he said about just really in the past 48 hours when he met with Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney, that the death, the bloodshed of ordinary civilians does touch him. He was referring to Ukraine, but also one likes to believe when he sees what's happening in Gaza, that's personally touched him as well and triggered him to really put the pressure on for a peace deal.
And so there is perhaps more hope in this deal than previous deals then, because of course this is not the first phase that Israel have agreed to before. How do we know this deal won't go the way of the deal agreed in the dying days of the Biden administration?
Well, yeah, we don't. I mean, the phrase is often used, the quicksand of the Middle East. Many Western leaders, from Macron to Carter to Obama to you name it, have been stuck in, it looked like they were on the precipice of getting a historic deal and then it all falls apart. I hate to use the well-worn term, the devil is in the details, but indeed it is. And we've already, I think, seen a little bit of that in the messaging that's come from the White House, from the Prime Minister of Israel's office, and also Hamas. The first reaction of Netanyahu was very, very brief. I believe it was, with God's help, we will bring them all home, all the hostages home. But I think that if there was ever a time when this needs to stop, it's now. We're talking about at least 67,000 people killed. 90% of the Gaza Strip is homeless. According to PBS NewsHour, I just watched their report, something like 600,000 kids are without school infrastructure. And when I say the devil is in the details, there's one factoid here that's still quite interesting, is that according to the lines that we've seen set by the White House for a phased Israel withdrawal, still about 40 to 42% of Gazans will remain displaced or homeless. That adds up to about, I believe, 800,000 people. It's still a lot. And don't forget, cooler weather, wetter weather is coming too. So that's going to be a problem. But the other interesting thing here is that the Hamas, if they do follow through, are giving away their most important bargaining chip, that being the 20 remaining live hostages. That's part of the first phase of the deal. Of course, that's something Benjamin Netanyahu and, of course, the Israeli people, especially the families of the hostages, want very much. As for the others remaining of the 28 who are believed to be dead, Hamas has said that they may not be able to find their bodies. They may have gotten lost or something like that. So those types of things are very, very important, of course, from the Israeli side, because that's what Netanyahu has promised. And one more important point, because I know this from having visited Israel just a few weeks after the October 7 attacks 2 years ago, is that you really, when you go there, you feel the power, the energy as a lobbying force of the families of the hostages. They have not given up. They have, kept that Central Square in Tel Aviv very, very active, had a lot of marches, brought Israel to a stop many, many times. So one last thing, we have to remember that Netanyahu is running a coalition government. He has the far right, especially two ministers who have said the only way we can make a deal with Hamas is with their total destruction. Of course, that's not happening with this deal. Let's see what happens there too.
And do we know the extent of the swap between Israel and Hamas? I mean, will this bring all of the hostages home? In effect, that would put an end to most of the conflict, wouldn't it?
Yes and no. We have to remember that Hamas is still there. They're still heavily armed. The Israeli far right says, stopping the fighting is just giving them an opportunity to regroup and to rearm. But the swap is significant, of course, in any conflict situation. It's what we call a trust building initiative. It shows that the two sides can, at least temporarily, trust each other and make things happen. I haven't had a chance to look in detail at the list of Palestinian prisoners, but some of them have quite the rap sheet. They come from Gaza and accused of terrorist attacks. So that's a biggie. But we're talking, I believe, at least 1,000 or so. And of course, they'll be warmly welcomed back home in Gaza. But that's also another point where the devil remains in the details as well, because these things can be stopped at any time. And we've seen that, in fact, happen before in hostage releases. It didn't happen on time. And also one important factor here, too, is the International Committee of the Red Cross, which is normally mandated with facilitating the kind of physical movement of the hostages. Their capacity has really been weakened. They've been fired upon. So, but their participation in this is going to be crucial too.
And do we know where this leaves the future of Gaza? I mean, presumably not Trump's Riviera of the Middle East, but are there plans in place that we know of for any sort of reconstruction?
Well, I wouldn't write that off. I mean, we're now seeing the arrangement, the outlines of an arrangement where Trump will basically be the chairman of a new body to oversee the redevelopment of Gaza. We've heard of duty-free port, free trading area. One thing that worries me is the sudden emergence of former British Prime Minister Tony Blair. He talk about rap sheets. I mean, him and his institute, there's not one autocratic government or corrupt government who is corrupt or dirty enough to not be a client of theirs. They've worked with some pretty nasty entities around the world. And then secondly, again, I've lived and worked in Jerusalem, and you go to the American Colony Hotel where him and his team kept camp for many, many, many months. And there's a joke going around that hotel. It's a 5-star luxury hotel that on the bar tab alone of Tony Blair's delegation, they were able to fund massive, massive renovations to that particular hotel. I don't want to make fun of any of this, but the most important thing here is that the Palestinians have made it very, very clear that yes, technocratic administrators or government, but they want them to be Palestinians, not outsiders. So I think that's going to be really important. I think it's an issue that is going to be kicked down the road a little bit further. And then another unanswered question, what is going to be the role of the Palestinian Authority who are based in Ramallah? Let's not forget, speaking of corruption, they're not liked or trusted, popularity at all-time low, and they haven't held elections for the longest time either. So boy, oh boy, hey, so many unanswered questions, but of course we all hope that this is a massive, massive turning point, and most importantly, after all there's bloodshed and destruction, it comes to an end and people can start rebuilding in Gaza, and of course in Israel, families can start, the process of healing and putting this behind them.
And while all this is going on today, France is hosting a series of key Middle Eastern nations on the future of Gaza. What might we expect them to be discussing? And does France have enough sway in this to perhaps influence what's going to happen next?
Well, you'd think President Emmanuel Macron has bigger problems on his hands than having to host this kind of negotiation or meeting. Of course, it's good that France is playing the role, but his government is hanging on tenterhooks right now after losing, the third prime minister in the matter of a few months. He's under a lot of pressure right now. That could have been held anywhere else. I mean, look at the diplomatic weight that was brought to bear on the negotiations that brought this deal. We had the Qatari leader, we had the head of intelligence of Turkey, we had the head of intelligence of Egypt. So all three of those countries could have been a venue as well. But I understand that if things do go well, U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio will be attending this meeting, and they'll be coming to some sort of agreement of how to proceed forward. But look, the most important thing is when you have, something like 90% or so of structures in Gaza totally demolished, who is going to be doing the rebuilding? But most importantly, who is going to be paying for it? I mean, as the aggressor state, that should be Israel, but I haven't heard a word from them about doing that. But obviously, there's probably billions of dollars worth of contracts here that can go out. A big question in my mind, if they do actually hold this meeting, is, it's very, very difficult to do such a massive reconstruction when you have so many people without shelter right now. And as I said, the weather is turning for cooler and wetter weather. And then there was just a report in the past 12 hours or so about rampant diseases as well, because I think there is something like only 7 or 8 hospitals in Gaza active, and most of them are without, proper electricity and water, sterilization equipment, that sort of thing. So that's going to be really, I think, an important element. Do you temporarily ask Gazans to go to Jordan or to Egypt or somewhere while this rebuilding is taking place? Politically, that's a very sensitive issue.
And Michael, you are speaking to us from Odessa in Ukraine at the moment. I mean, I want to come on to the shift in the White House's policy towards Kiev. But first of all, what can you tell us about the quite significant attacks on your city in the last 24 hours?
Yeah, pretty hard. We got wind of this actually around 8 p.m. local time last night when the air raid sirens went off. And I noticed they were on for quite some time. And I did see the anti-aircraft defense units moving about where I normally do my long power walks. So I don't want to say exactly where that is, but there was mobilization, and that kind of told us that there's something big. And then, of course, when we woke up this morning, there were quite big hits. fires started, especially DTEC, the private power provider here, announcing that energy infrastructure has been hit. And it was only 2 or 3 days ago when I was walking around at night, and for the first time in a long time, I heard businesses running generators. That means, of course, there's a lack of power. There were some hits on civilian infrastructure as well, some fires. But, one last thing on this is, for the most part, the port is being left intact to operate. Quickly, there's good news and bad news on that. Good news, of course, is that that's great for the Ukrainian economy and for the port. But the bad news is it does make you wonder, are the Russians deliberately leaving that infrastructure alone for hopes of taking it over later on? I don't know.
And meanwhile, Ukraine's own strikes against Russia are continuing. Trump last week committing more intelligence support for targeting oil and energy infrastructure. How much damage could the White House be helping to deal to Russia here?
Well, quite a bit. I mean, even President Putin has admitted that the petrochemical refineries in Russia have been hit quite a bit, and that this has led to not only a shortage of petrol, but also a spike in prices. He has claimed the Russians in 2005 alone have taken over 4,900 square kilometers of Ukrainian territory, apparently equal to the size of Delaware, where the respected Institute for the Study of War says it's only 3,561. Big difference there. But going back to what's happening in Russia, I mean, this is all thanks to a couple of things. One is Ukraine's incredible domestic military infrastructure that basically grew out of nowhere to world power with these high-tech drones with not only a lot of muscle, a lot of punch, but also a lot of range. But now this is being enhanced by two things. One is by upgraded intelligence from the United States, so that the Ukrainians can strike more precisely and more further into Russia. And indeed, we're seeing even more targeted strikes on these petrochemical refineries, where they're actually striking, according to experts, the heart of them, the parts that are really hard to rebuild. But if you add on top of that the reported provision of the Tomahawk missile from the United States, lots of range there, lots of power, it doesn't put Russia in a very good spot. And let's not forget that it is the energy, the oil infrastructure that is providing cash, a lot of cash, billions of dollars for the Russian war machine. You start really targeting that. I heard a figure at a closed-door briefing in New York that Ukraine has already disabled 25% of petrochemical complexes in Russia. That's a really big hit. And of course, added on top of the impact that Russians are not able to get petrol, and also that could also debilitate Russia's ability to export oil to big clients like India, like Russia, and like Brazil.
And of course, there's been ongoing discussion as well around the idea of supplying Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine. It's actually been highlighted on our sister show Frontline this week that the discussion of Tomahawk itself might be just as important, if not more important, than the missiles, only because it just keeps the Americans and Europe and everyone really talking about the idea of more support for these attacks on Russia.
Yeah, it certainly provides a lot of kind of a psychological impact on the negative sense on the Russians, because this is a clear signal that Mr. Trump is getting increasingly fed up with Mr. Putin. It was only as recently as a few weeks ago that we still believed that Mr. Trump was succumbing to Mr. Putin's charm and that he could be persuadable and malleable. Well, he's not. He has made it clear in the past 24 hours that he intends to pursue all of the goals that were set at the start of the war. Secondly, I think that mindset that Mr. Putin is keeping has finally got through the head of Mr. Trump, and that he's willing to back the Ukrainians even more to get the job done. I think there's also pressure from the Europeans, an important ally, given the very, very brazen incursions into NATO, into EU airspace of Russian drones and other kit. that they are prepared to expand this war. I can tell you it does not take much from the Russian side to cause a lot of anxiety, to cause a lot of panic in Europe, because we're seeing just how far they can reach. The most recent airport being disrupted is in Vilnius, but we've seen as far as Denmark, and by the way, they're the biggest provider in terms of percentage of GDP of military aid to Ukraine. So probably this is being seen by the White House. They say enough is enough. Let's give Ukraine what it takes to perhaps finish the job. But again, I have to say what we heard from Putin just, the past 24 hours, he's showing no sign whatsoever of ending this war. He wants to go full throttle. And, of course, they have no concerns about losing more men on this side because they seem to feel like they have a limitless supply. And, of course, also they've readapted their economy to a military economy where it's all geared up to provide lots and lots of drones and missiles and other kit.
Indeed. And speaking to press earlier this week, Trump called negotiations with Russia maybe tougher when compared to those he's been doing in Israel. Putin has been more definitive on that, saying that efforts on the idea of peace talks have been exhausted. Can we now draw a line under the possibility of a negotiated settlement in the war in Ukraine?
Well, the negotiated settlement only happens when one side believes that's it, that they can't win. And the Ukrainians, I know actually, have spilt so much blood. There's so much of the country that has been destructed that there's no way that they can just give up and say that's it, because they legitimately believe, as do leaders in Poland, as do leaders in the Baltic nations, that, you can give the Russians a ceasefire agreement or a peace deal, but unless they're decapitated militarily, they will come back for more. This was made clear to me many, many times on my recent visit to North America, as long as Mr. Putin is alive, he will pursue his dream of taking over Ukraine and then some. So, maybe if we have this combination that we've been talking about, where the Ukrainians continue to really damage Russian infrastructure, especially the energy point, I think, because that's really all the Russians have left, right, to fund their economy. The other parts of the economy are in really bad state. That could force them. But I think that could be the end of Putin, because he had failed in his major goal. And then it may lead Russians to ask, well, how about these million plus men and women who have died or have been permanently injured? So there's a lot going on here, but my immediate fear, where I sit here in Odessa, is that they will pound away very, very hard in the next days and weeks ahead of winter to make life here very, very difficult. Of course, that hurts not only civilians, it hurts not only the economy, but it could hurt politically Mr. Zelensky as well, could pressure him to come to some sort of negotiating table.
And those comments Trump made about negotiations, or the idea of negotiations with Russia, were made alongside Mark Carney, kind of as Prime Minister, when they met in the Oval Office earlier this week. Trump said there's a mutual love between the US and Canada, but also a natural conflict. Do you think Canada's any closer to defusing Trump's trade war?
Well, my goodness, what a love fest that was, wasn't it? I mean, I thought Keir Starmer took the cake in terms of buttering up Mr. Trump to the point where his cholesterol level went through the roof. But when I saw Mark Carney and the way he was buttering up Trump, I think there was even an invitation to come to Ottawa, and Trump calling him the greatest leader ever. And we love Canadians. He made a joke about still wanting to take over Canada. But look, jokes aside, the feeling I picked up in Canada, not only from my recent visit, but over the past 24 hours or so, is that it doesn't appear that all of this bonhomie led further. In other words, for them going back to Ottawa with a proper agreement where at least tariffs on aluminum and steel would come down from the very punishing 50%, that there'd be a proper agreement on the car industry. In fact, Mr. Carney left his senior ministers and teams behind in Washington to hammer out a deal. But I'm very concerned that this was a big show, as it often is with Mr. Trump, and we're not going to be any further. You know, he loses attention very quickly. But having said all that, just to end on this, personal relationships are very, very important with Mr. Trump, and that could help get Canada over the finishing line, let's see. But let's not also forget that there's also coming up, it has to come up in the next year, the renegotiation of the massive trade agreement between Canada, United States, and Mexico. So, but it's really, really important for something to happen here for Mr. Carney, because he was elected, but he has a minority government, and the opposition party has made it clear that this was, as they put it, pretty much an embarrassing performance by Mr. Carney, that he bowed down to a Mr. Trump in front of the world television cameras.
Well, Michael Bociurkiw, author, journalist, and founder of the Substack World Briefing, thank you very much for speaking with me today on the Trump Report.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.